we're joined by NFL former quarterback Drew Bledsoe. Mr. Bledsoe, introduce yourself to your audience and talk a little bit about your background in football.
Yeah, had the great privilege of playing NFL quarterback for 14 years. First 9 with the Patriots until that disrespectful backup quarterback of mine came in when I got hurt. Tom Brady came in and took over, and I didn't get my job back, which was disappointing. But then I got to go from there. I got to go play for the Buffalo Bills for 3 years, which was a fantastic experience. Just absolutely loved being in Western New York. The fans there are so loyal, and I tell people playing in Buffalo was like playing pro ball in a college town, which I just really loved. And then from there, my last 2 years were with the Dallas Cowboys. I got to go down and play in Dallas, which was really an interesting experience. Sort of like pitching for the Yankees. Like people either love you or hate you, but they definitely have strong feelings about Cowboys quarterback no matter what. And then after that, I decided it was time to retire. But retirement for me didn't mean just riding off into the sunset. I was only 35 years old, so had to find something else to be passionate about. And my wife and I had a shared passion for wine. While I was playing ball, my little hometown, Walla Walla, Washington, that I grew up in, had become one of the great grape growing regions of the world. So when I left football, I was able to return home to Walla Walla, return home to my hometown, and start a winery, started Doubleback Winery. And our intention all along was to, not just make wine, but try to make wine that would compete on a world stage. And proud to say that we've done that. And over the last 13 years, I guess, we've built Doubleback into a real business. On top of that, I'm happily married, 4 kids, 3 in college. Coached high school football for 6 years out here in Bend, Oregon, which was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. Play a lot of golf, like to ski, like to ride bikes. So far it's been a good run. And we'll see what's next.
Now, you spent your collegiate career at Washington State. So when you're going through the recruiting process, obviously it's close to home where you grew up, but what appealed to you about the school, and what were some of the biggest lessons or impacts that Washington State had on you personally and professionally?
Yeah, perfect. Great question. So when I was being recruited, this was the good old days where if you were going to try and get recruited, you had to spend a whole bunch of time with some VCRs and dub tapes and then send them out, via snail mail. You couldn't just make your huddle video and send out the link to all the coaches. And being from a little tiny small town, I actually had to work to be recruited a little bit. So I sent videos around to a handful of schools that I was interested in. Ended up whittling that down to 4 schools that I took trips to. Went to obviously Washington State, went to the University of Washington, took a trip down to Stanford. And then my last trip was to University of Miami, which for a kid from Walla Walla, Washington, in the middle of nowhere, getting on a plane and flying to Miami and sitting on the beach was quite an experience, but it was just too far away from home. Ultimately, my decision came down to a coach that I just really, really fell in love with. Mike Price was just an amazing coach, and still a great friend to this day at Washington State. And as far as lessons learned, one of the most important lessons that I learned when it started to look like I was going to be able to have a career in football, not just a college career, but to continue to go on from there. I had a sports information director that came to me, and he said, he goes, make sure that you realize that you really represent 2 people. There's the football player guy, and that guy, is a good player, and he's going to do everything he can to win football games on the field. But then when you leave that, you got to keep the other person intact, and that's the normal person that lives an everyday life. And as long as you keep those 2 separate in your mind, you can do both effectively. If you start to cross the lines and you start to get your self-worth and your life too connected with the outcome of the last game on the field, that's when you set yourself up for real problems. So was able to do that for the most part. I tried not to bring it home very often when I was playing ball. Hopefully my wife and kids would attest to that. But that was an important lesson I learned when I was there.
Then you obviously translated that into becoming the #1 pick of the New England Patriots, as you talked about before. So entering the league as the #1 pick is obviously a very unique experience. What was it like for you handling that kind of pressure, and what were some of the biggest challenges you had to endure as being the #1 pick?
Well, the biggest challenge is that when you're the #1 overall pick, particularly as a quarterback, by definition, you're going to a team that wasn't very good the year before. You don't, unless there's a crazy trade. You don't get to go to the reigning champion. You go to the team that finished last, and so that's a big challenge first and foremost. Going to Boston was an eye-opening experience. I went from small town high school, small town college into one of the most passionate sports towns in America, and learning to deal with 4 or 5 newspapers and people that were competing for space and on the front page. That was kind of interesting. All of a sudden, from a very protected environment into really into a wolf's den. That was an interesting experience. But the refuge always was when we got to go on the field and play. And for me, football is still football. It was much faster, obviously, when I got to the NFL. There was a lot more to process. But ultimately, it was still just football, and that was really where I found my refuge when the times were the craziest. Had to deal with Bill Parcells as my coach my first 4 years, which I don't think anybody that's ever played for him would say that was a real treat. The one method to his madness was that Sundays seemed pretty easy because I got to get away from him. He could never be closer than like 30 yards from me when I was on the field. When I was on the practice field, he'd stand right behind me and just critique every single thing I did. So I really loved Sundays when he was my coach. But we made it through, and then we won our last 4 games my rookie year, which gave us some momentum going into the second year. And in my second year, we made the playoffs for the first time in a long, long time. The teams that I was a part of when we were in New England, I think all of us that were there kind of in the early 90s or early to mid 90s, we take a lot of pride in the fact that we started with a team that was really last. And by the time we were done, it was a very relevant franchise. And obviously from then on, they've gone on to be maybe the best sports franchise in the whole world in terms of their continued success. But we take a lot of pride in the fact that we were there when it changed, and so that was a cool experience.
Then in 1996, your Patriots were able to go play the Green Bay Packers in the Super Bowl, and obviously that didn't necessarily go as according to plan for you guys, but it's still a pretty unique experience for a quarterback or anybody playing in that game. So for those who have never experienced that, what's the preparation like for a Super Bowl game compared to any other game that you prepared for?
It's the preparation side of it is unique in a couple of different ways. One is you're at a different spot. We practiced at Tulane, where the Super Bowl, that first Super Bowl was in New Orleans. So you're in a different location. But the other thing is, for that week, you're the center of the sports universe. There's no other football games. All the attention of the entire sports world. And even back then, when you had, I don't know, probably 1/100th of the media outlets in '96 that you do today. Even then, media day was crazy. You're dealing with reporters that aren't necessarily used to covering football or even sports. Sometimes, you get like weird questions like, "Hey, why is the football shaped the way it is?" Like just these off the wall questions. But then when you take the field on game day, you do get a strong sense that this game is bigger than any other. And it takes a little while. I think anybody that ever played in that game would probably say the same. The first time you play in that Super Bowl game, it takes a little while to settle down and realize, hey, this is just a football game, right? We're going to play football. We're obviously playing against, one of the 2 best teams in the league that year, so you have a big challenge. But once you settle down, you realize it's just football. Unfortunately, Desmond Howard ruined that game for us, man. I mean, we had just taken the lead, and friggin' Desmond Howard takes the ensuing kickoff back for a touchdown, and then he had another big punt return. I had a chance to do college game day with Desmond this last year, and I punched him in the shoulder. I was like, "Hey, man, you ruined my Super Bowl, bud." But it was an amazing experience.
And then, as you alluded to, you spent the latter part of your career in Dallas and in Buffalo, but unfortunately, you were kind of limited by injuries during that portion of your career. So how difficult was it for you to deal with those injuries, and how did you handle it and overcome that adversity, especially when some of your former teams were doing so well?
Yeah, when you play quarterback, you do everything that you can, and prepare as hard as you can. And there certainly are lots of things that I could have done differently in those times during that stretch. But you are a little bit at the mercy of what's going on around you. And unfortunately, in a few of those years, we ended up with multiple offensive line injuries, and we had lots of things going on that really limited us. And it bums me out. I mean, shoot, in both situations, I really had grand visions of taking those teams on to a championship, and it didn't work out. But ultimately, one of the things you learn in ball, and it's translated into business for me and really into my life, is you learn to embrace adversity. Not, you're never going to wish for adversity. You don't want bad things to happen. But you can really grow through adverse times. And I saw that in football, both personally and within our teams. And I certainly see that in business. When we face business adversity, we got to the point now where when those things happen, we're like, okay, we didn't want this to happen, but man, we're going to get a lot better coming out of this. So that's really the attitude that I took when things were not going perfectly. That was a chance for real leadership. When you're winning games 40-0 and everything's going along swimmingly, leadership is pretty easy, and pretty much anybody wants to step to the forefront in those times. But when things are going sideways, that's where you have to really step up and be a true leader.
When you look back at your career as an entire picture, how would you like your legacy to be defined?
I think the thing that you strive for, if you're doing things right, is you strive for the respect of your teammates, and you strive for the respect of your opponents. And I know throughout my career I had both of those. Now, like I said, things didn't go perfectly, obviously, but ultimately those are the things that you want to come out of it with. And it goes a little bit back to what I, commented on earlier. There can be a perception from the outside, from people that aren't competing with you or people that are competing against you, that can be very different from what's actually, going on within your own team and with your opponents. And, so that's, if I had to point to one thing that I'm proud of coming out of that, it would be that. I know that I had great respect for my teammates and great respect for my opponents. Ultimately the wins and losses determine, how you're perceived from the outside, but from the inside, that was a good thing to come out of it with. Still keep in touch with a lot of guys that I played with, still talk to a lot of the guys I played against. And that was cool. And I think the other thing that I would point to that I'm proud of coming out of my career is I think I always tried to conduct myself with dignity and with some class, regardless of how things were going. And that's both publicly and within the team. So when I look back on it, that's a part that's very much within my control. And I like to think that the parts that were within my control, I did a good job of.
Now, transitioning to your coaching career side of things at the high school level, in Bend, Oregon, you were able to coach some of your sons during their high school careers. So tell us a little bit what that experience was like as a father, and for, future fathers out there who are going to coach their sons, what advice would you pass on to them?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I would point to is that coaching is a privilege, and it's an opportunity, especially at the high school level. We tried to teach life skills. We tried to teach, character, work ethic, teamwork, self-sacrifice, all of those kinds of things that are really life skills. And then if they learned some football along the way, that was cool too. But we really felt like our primary job was to teach those life skills. And now I'm getting to see some of that come back. I got some of these guys that have graduated and gone on and now are graduating college and out in the workforce and starting their own families and getting married. And so now I've got a chance to have more of an adult relationship with some of those guys. And so that's the reward that I get from that, is I get to be friends with these guys now at an adult level. As far as coaching my sons, they made it pretty easy because they were very hard workers. They were great teammates. They were really smart football players. So I never had to be in a situation where I had to bark at them, or I could always point to them as examples for how you do things. So that made it really, really easy for me to do that. If they'd been screw ups, it'd be a different conversation, but thankfully they were they did things properly, and that really made it quite easy.
Looking at yourself as the offensive coordinator, what would you describe your philosophy as a play caller, and maybe what were some of those core concepts that you may have hung your hat on as an offensive coordinator?
There are a couple of things I'd point to. First, we tried to make sure the defense was never comfortable. We tried to make sure that they had to defend the entire field and couldn't focus on just one thing. We tried to be simple offensively while still looking complex to the defense with, some different formations and motions and so on, but ultimately running the same plays so that they had to react, but we knew exactly what we were doing. The other thing that I had to learn as a play caller, you got limited time in high school. You can't go install an NFL offense. And as a play caller and as a coach, I had to learn, number one, that if there's something that you can't do well as an offense, you just don't do it, right? You don't try to force a square peg into a round hole. But the complementary side of that is if there are things that you do very well, then you continue to do those things and you try to do them in different ways, and focus on what you really are good at and what your skill set is as a team. We ended up being pretty balanced most of the time, run and pass, but there were games we'd come out and throw it every down. There were other games we'd come out and run it every down. But at the end of the season, we were pretty balanced, but balance was never something that I found important. What I found important was finding where your advantage is. And if your advantage is in the passing game, you do that. If your advantage is in the running game, you do that. If your advantage is in play action or misdirection, then you do that. And then we'd always have a couple of trick plays. Trick plays are always fun. The kids got fired up about them, and it was fun to draw them up. And so if we saw something during the week that somebody else did, we'd just copy them and put in some cute little trick play. But philosophically, from a play calling standpoint, those are the key factors.
Now, there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are quarterback guys, and they always are talking about how to train the quarterbacks. And so you have some that are in the camp are in more of a read progression type of thing when they're putting in their passing game. And then there's others who are more coverage identification. Which one are you more of a supporter at the high school level, the read progression side of things or more of a coverage identification?
It's a combination of both. What we would generally do is we teach the quarterbacks to have a pre-snap read to try to identify what coverage they think possibly could be coming. And then that would determine where their progression would go and which side of the field, right? So, if you, for example, if you got two high safeties, it's generally either cover 2 or cover 4. And we would have part of the route progression that was used to attack that kind of defense. And if it was a single high safety, so you either got man or cover 3 at the high school level, it's fairly limited to those kinds of coverages. Then you have another piece of the pass route that you read versus that. And then if you have blitz, you have an answer to that. You always have a hot route. So for me, it was a combination. I felt like it was important for the quarterbacks to understand coverage and understand where the weaknesses were in particular coverages. And then once they understood, within some parameters, what they thought they were going to get, then that would determine where their progression would go.
Now, transitioning into your career in the winery business, tell us a little bit, and you've kind of talked about it already just in passing, but what really led you into wine? What made that a passion of yours?
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about your career in the wine business.
Yeah, there were a couple things. Number one, we just like wine. My wife and I like wine, so you got to start there. You're not going to get into that business if you don't like it. But secondly, the wine business is really, really interesting. It's something you can learn about for your entire life. You start out, you're in land acquisition, so we're kind of always looking for property to acquire. Then you're a farmer, and you're growing grapes. Then you're into the production side of things and trying to produce the best product from the grapes that you harvest. But then you're into marketing and developing brands and developing brand stories and brand identities and market strategies. And then you're into fulfillment and distribution and then customer service at the end of the day. And so it's been a continual learning process for me. The cool piece is that there's so much carryover from being the quarterback of a team to running a business. From teamwork. We talked about team earlier. If I love wine, and I know just enough to be dangerous about the whole process. But if I was the one actually making the wine, we wouldn't be very good, right? But I've got a great winemaker and a great team. We have a great vineyard crew that does that. And then on the sales and marketing side, we've got great people that have learned to treat all of our customers like family, and they go the extra mile to make sure that people not only like and enjoy wine, but they like and enjoy the entire experience they have with our team. And then you get to the financial side. Shoot, I never thought I'd know as much about accounting as I do now. I had to learn that, because if you're not understanding, where you're spending and what the result of that is, and continuously analyzing that, then you're kind of just, throwing it out there. And but the one overriding thing that I would say that's allowed us to be successful, when you're a quarterback, every single detail matters. When you're handing the ball off, do you put the ball in the proper spot to the running back? Is your footwork proper? Are you carrying out your fakes? Then do you have good eye discipline? Are you seeing things the right ways? And then you get to coaching all the other positions. And for offensive linemen, it's their exact steps and their exact hand placement, and then route stems, all of these things. And in business, it's really the same thing. There are no small details. There are only details. And if you're really going to be excellent, you have to try to get every single detail done properly. If you let anything slide, then you give somebody else a chance to compete with you. And so that translation from ball to business has really allowed us to be quite successful.
What's your ultimate goal for Doubleback Winery? Where do you hope this business journey takes you?
Well, I could read you our mission statement, but ultimately, in terms of where we go in the future, we want methodical, managed growth. We're not trying to be the biggest winery in the world, but we do want to continue to grow. But we only want to grow. We're not going to grow for the sake of growth. We're going to grow as we see demand. Sometimes that's hard to forecast in wine, because your product cycles are so long. You're really looking at 3-year product cycles from the time you harvest fruit until you sell Cabernet. When it comes to planting vineyard, you're trying to forecast a decade into the future, because you've got 3 years before you have fruit, and then 4 more years, so 7 years total before you have mature vineyards. And then from that mature vineyard, you got 3 years until the wine's out. So we're not pedal to the metal. How fast can we grow? But we are growing. We're growing at a pretty consistent double-digit pace, kind of 17 to 20% a year, and we'll continue to do that as long as we have demand there for it. And in terms of what the future holds, we're just trying to build the best business that we can. And we're not we got into it because we love it. We're not looking to build this thing and sell the business. We're just trying to grow the best business that we can, that allows us to enjoy what we do on a daily basis. And at the same time, turn it into a profitable business. So it's a challenge. It's a continuous challenge, day in and day out, to figure out what we're doing near term and what our 3 and 5 and 7 year forecasts look like. But as a broad statement, we want to continue to grow, but only in a way that we can sustain it and also continue to enjoy it.
And my final question for you, Drew, is for those listening to the podcast right now, and if they want to consume or possibly get a taste of your wine, where are some of the places they could get that opportunity?
We sell about 90% of our wine. We sell direct to the consumer online, so they can find us at doubleback.com. We have a second winery. It's called Bledsoe Family Winery. Doubleback is this high-end, exclusive, very small production, expensive wine. Bledsoe price points are a little more accessible. We make different kinds of wine: Cabernet, raw, Chardonnay, rosé. So we make a few different wines there. We have a wine club on that side. So if people want to dip their toe in the water without paying $100 a bottle, they can go there. And at $100, by the way, we still feel like we're a value at $100 for Doubleback. And you look at the scores and the reputation that we have, and you put us up against our California competitors that are in the same realm. We're many times 1/3 the price of competitors in the Napa Valley, and same in Bordeaux. For wines that achieve the same scores that we achieve, and you're in Bordeaux, now you're spending $700, $800, $900 a bottle. So but yeah, if you want to find us, and you want to dip your toe in the water, Bledsoe family winery is where to start. If you're a serious wine connoisseur, you want to start at the double back end, and we truly feel like we're making one of the best Cabernets in the entire world.